Good evening, fellow constant reader. It may or may not surprise you that I have not, in fact, read all of Stephen King's work. I've read most of it. But as you know, this man has written a lot. And he is not done writing yet. On May 21st, 2024, his newest collection of short stories will be on the shelves of your local bookstore. You Like It Darker features 5 previously unpublished works, as well as a handful of other stories that have already been printed in magazines or published online. It goes without saying that I am so grateful to be living in the age of Stephen King. And tonight, I would like to try to do something we've never done on this channel. Make a reaction video. That's right, a reaction video as I read and discuss a Stephen King story that I have never read before. It is called The Fifth Step. It was published in the March 2020 issue of Harper's Magazine, and I have no idea what it's about or how I'm going to feel about it. But if you would like to watch and listen as we discover this story together, then welcome to the Stephen King Book Club. Before we begin, please note that I will be reading and reacting to Stephen King's story, one I haven't read before, and I don't know if this will be an engaging way for you to experience the story the first time, so I will include a link to Harper's Magazine in case you would rather read the story yourself, and then you can perhaps come back to this video and listen to me ramble. And now, if you're still here, let's begin to read, react, and discuss as I narrate The Fifth Step by Stephen King. Harold Jameson, once chief engineer of New York City's sanitation department, enjoyed retirement. He knew from his small circle of friends that some didn't, so he considered himself lucky. He had an acre of garden in Queens that he shared with several like-minded horticulturists. He had discovered Netflix, and he was making inroads in the books he'd always meant to read. He still missed his wife, a victim of breast cancer 5 years previous. But aside from that persistent ache, his life was quite full. Before rising every morning, he reminded himself to enjoy the day. At 68, he liked to think he had a fair amount of road left, but there was no denying it had begun to narrow. The best part of those days, assuming it wasn't raining, snowing, or too cold, was the 9-block walk to Central Park after breakfast. Although he had carried a cell phone and used an electric tablet, had grown dependent on it in fact, he still preferred the print version of the Times. In the park, he would settle on his favorite bench and spend an hour with it, reading the sections back to front, telling himself that he was progressing from the sublime to the ridiculous. All right, so far we have a widower character. Also, let me put one of the sentences up on the screen. Notice that we have the phrase "had grown dependent on it," in fact, in parenthesis. Stephen King uses parenthesis so much, and I read so much Stephen King, that my own writing is filled with parenthetical commentary, so I always laugh to myself when I see the parenthesis being used in King's work. And since I have paused this story for a moment, I think it's a good time to play Stephen Kingo. That is bingo with the works of Stephen King. And as you can see here, the use of parenthesis is right in the middle of our card, so we're going to check that one. Let's see if we can get a Kingo by the end of the story. Let's continue. One morning in mid-May, the weather coolish but perfectly adequate for bench sitting and newspaper reading, he was annoyed to look up from his paper and see a man sitting down on the other end of his bench, although there were plenty of empty ones in the vicinity. This invader of Jameson's morning space looked to be in his mid to late 40s, neither handsome nor ugly, in fact, perfectly nondescript. The same was true of his attire: New Balance walking shoes, jeans, a Yankees cap, and a Yankees hoodie with the hood tossed back. Jameson gave him an impatient side glance and prepared to move to another bench. "Wait," the man said. "I sat down here because I need a favor. It's not a big one, but I'll pay." He reached into the kangaroo pouch of his hoodie and brought out a $20 bill. All right, a little bit of a reaction. First of all, here's my guess. Because this person is wearing a Yankees hoodie, this is a bad person. Stephen King loves the Red Sox. The Yankees are usually portrayed as evil, so good things are probably not in store. Let's check our Kingo card to see if we can fill in another space, and no, this one says mentioning Red Sox, not the Yankees, so we do not get to fill this one in. Let's continue. "I don't do favors for strange men," Jameson said, and got up. "But that's exactly the point, the two of us being strangers. Hear me out. If you say no, that's fine. But please, hear me out. You could—" He cleared his throat. And Jameson realized the guy was nervous, maybe more, maybe scared. "You could be saving my life." Jameson considered, then sat down, but as far from the other man as he could while still keeping both butt cheeks on the bench. "I'll give you a minute, but if you sound crazy, I'm leaving. And put your money away. I don't need it, and I don't want it." I love that dialogue. I love that line. I feel like Jameson is pretty down to earth. I don't need it. I don't want it. He's going to give this guy a chance, but he's also no nonsense. The man looked at the bill as if surprised to find it still in his hand, then put it back in the pocket of his sweatshirt. He put his hands on his thighs and looked down at them instead of at Jameson. "I'm an alcoholic. 4 months sober. 4 months and 12 days to be exact." "Congratulations," Jameson said. He guessed he meant it, but he was even more ready to get up. The guy seemed sane, but Jameson was old enough to know that sometimes the woo-woo didn't come out right away. Woo-woo, I love it. Also, by the way, I'm very intrigued by this line that the man, the mysterious stranger, says, "You could be saving my life." So let's keep reading. "I've tried 3 times before, and once got almost a year. I think that this might be my last chance to grab the brass ring. I'm in AA. I know what it is. What's your name, Mr. 4 months sober?" "You can call me Jack. That's good enough. We don't use last names in the program." Jameson knew that too. Lots of people on the Netflix shows had alcohol problems. "So what can I do for you, Jack?" "The first 3 times I tried, I didn't get a sponsor in the program. Somebody listens to you, answers your questions, sometimes tells you what to do. This time I did. Met a guy at the Bowery Sundown meeting and really liked the stuff he said. And you know how he carried himself. 12 years sober, feet on the ground, works in sales like me." He had turned to look at Jameson, but now he returned his gaze to his hands. "I used to be a hell of a salesman. For 5 years, I headed the sales department of— well, it doesn't matter. But it was a big deal. You'd know the company. Now I'm down to peddling greeting cards and energy drinks to bodegas in the 5 boroughs. Last rung on the ladder, man." "Get to the point," Jameson said, And I will pause. Kind of like Jameson, I want to know what the point is. More specifically, I want to find out, is there going to be something supernatural? This is in Harper's Magazine, so this could be, a tender drama, one of the rare Stephen King stories that isn't concerned with, deep, dark fears. Either way, I'm intrigued. So Jameson has said, "Get to the point," Jameson said, but not harshly. He had become a little interested in spite of himself. It was not every day that a stranger sat down on your bench and started spilling his shit, especially not in New York. "I was just going to check on the Mets. They're off to a good start." Jack rubbed a palm across his mouth. "I like this guy I met at the Sundown, so I got up my courage after a meeting and asked him to be my sponsor. In March this was. He looked me over and said he'd take me on, but only on 2 conditions: that I do everything he said and call him if I felt like drinking. "Then I'll be calling you every fucking night," I said. And he said, "So call me every fucking night. And if I don't answer, talk to the machine." Then he asked me if I worked the steps. Do you know what those are? Vaguely. I said I hadn't gotten around to them. He said that if I wanted him to be my sponsor, I'd have to start. He said the first 3 were both the hardest and the easiest. They boil down to, I can't stop on my own, but with God's help I can. So I'm going to let him help. Jameson grunted. I said I didn't believe in God. This guy, Randy's his name, said he didn't give a shit. He told me to get down on my knees every morning and ask this God I didn't believe in to help me stay sober another day. And if I did, he said for me to get down on my knees before I turned in and thank God for my sober day. Randy asked if I was willing to do that, and I said I was, because I'd lose him otherwise. You see? Sure, you were desperate. This part is reminding me a lot of Dr. Sleep, which deals with alcoholism and the struggle for recovery, as well as the 12-step program. Back to the story. Sure, you are desperate. Exactly. The gift of desperation. That's what AAs call it. Randy said if I didn't do those prayers and said I was doing them, he'd know, because he spent 30 years lying his ass off about everything. So you did it? Even though you don't believe in God? I did it, and it's been working. As for my belief that there's no God, the longer I stay sober, the more that wavers. If you're going to ask me to pray with you, forget it. Another thing I like that's embedded in much of King's work is humanity's relationship with the divine and whether or not something good is out there helping us, whether that's a god or a turtle or Ka. Back to the story. If you're going to ask me to pray with you, forget it. Jack smiled down at his hands. Nope, I still feel self-conscious about the on my knees thing, even when I'm by myself. Last month, April, Randy told me to do the 4th step. That's when you make a moral inventory, supposedly searching and fearless of your character. I'm going to pause there and just admit that I'm an idiot. I completely forgot that this story was called the 5th step, and so it's probably going to be about step number 5 in the 12-step program. And I don't know what that is, so I'm going to look that up right now. Hey Siri, what's the 5th step in the 12-step program?
Sponsees typically do their 5th step, review their moral inventory written as part of the 4th step, with their sponsor. The 5th step, as well as the 9th step, have been compared to confession and penitence.
All right, so thanks to Siri, I know that the 5th step is pretty much confession. Back to the story. The 4th step, that's when you make a moral inventory, supposedly searching and fearless of your character. Did you? Yes. Randy said I was supposed to put down the bad stuff, then turn the page and list the good stuff. It took me 10 minutes for the bad stuff, over an hour for the good stuff. When I told Randy, He said that was normal. You drank for almost 30 years, he said. That puts a lot of bruises on a man's self-image. But if you stay sober, they'll heal. Then he told me to burn the lists. He said that would make me feel better. Did it? Strangely enough, it did. Anyway, that brings us to this month's request from Randy. More of a demand, I'm guessing, Jameson said, smiling a little. He folded his newspaper and laid it aside. Oh, that's nice. Now Jameson is fully invested in this. I'm getting a little bit of Forrest Gump vibes here. Jack also smiled. I think you're catching the sponsor-sponsee dynamic. Randy told me it was time to do my 5th step, which is admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, Jack said, making quote marks with his fingers. I told him okay, I'd make a list and read it to him. God could listen in. 2 birds with 1 stone deal. I'm thinking he said no. He said no. He told me to approach a complete stranger. His first suggestion was a priest or a minister, but I haven't set foot in a church since I was 12, and I have no urge to go back. Whatever I'm coming to believe, and I don't know yet what it is, I don't need to sit in a church pew to help it along. Jameson, no churchgoer himself, nodded his understanding. Okay, let's talk about expectations here at this point. Again, because it's Stephen King, we are often expecting like, oh, there's something scary and brutal that's going to happen. But at this point, it's really 50-50. He could tell us something, right? Give us some confession. I don't think that's supernatural, but something that is just awful and morbid and terrible. But it could also be something that's more dramatic. I'm going to guess that Jameson is actually not a stranger and that he's going to reveal something that has to do with Jameson's past. I'm just spitballing ideas here. Now that I've said that out loud, that seems dumb. But let's see. Jameson, no churchgoer himself, nodded his understanding. Randy said, so walk up to somebody in Washington Square or Central Park and ask him to hear you list your wrongs. Offer a few bucks to sweeten the deal if that's what it takes. Keep asking until someone agrees to listen. He said the hard part would be the asking part, and he was right. Am I your first victim was the phrase that came to mind, but Jameson decided it wasn't exactly fair. Am I the first person you've approached? The second, Jack grinned. I tried an off-duty cab driver yesterday, and he told me to get lost. Jameson thought of an old New York joke. Out-of-towner approaches a guy on Lexington Avenue and says, can you tell me how to get to City Hall, or should I just go fuck myself? He decided he wasn't going to tell the guy in the Yankees gear to go fuck himself. He would listen, and the next time he met his friend Alex, another retiree, for lunch, he'd have something interesting to talk about. Okay, go for it. Jack reached into the pouch of his hoodie, took out a piece of paper, and unfolded it. When I was in the 4th grade, if this is going to be your life story, maybe you better give me that 20 after all. Jack reached into his hoodie with the hand not holding his list of wrongdoings, but Jameson waved it off. Joking? Sure? Jameson didn't know whether he was or not. Yes, but let's not take too long. I've got an appointment at 8:30. This wasn't true, and Jameson reflected that it was good he didn't have the alcohol problem, because according to the TV meetings he'd attended, honesty was a big deal if you did. And so now we get like a little peek into Jameson, right? This is a little white lie that many of us, myself included, tell, right? We'll just say, oh, I have to do something, sort of as an escape clause. Continuing on, the stranger says, keep it speedy. Got it. Here goes. In 4th grade, I got into a fight with another kid. Gave him a bloody lip and nose. When we got to the principal's office, I said it was because he'd called my mother a dirty name. He denied it, of course, but we both got sent home with a note for our parents. Or just my mom in my case, because my dad left us when I was 2. Which is very similar to Stephen King's childhood. And the dirty name thing? A lie. I was having a bad day and thought I'd feel better if I got into a fight with this kid I didn't like. I didn't know why I didn't like him. I guess there was a reason, but I don't remember what it was. Only that it set a pattern of lying. Ooh, theme. Lying. I started drinking in junior high. My mother had a bottle of vodka she kept in the freezer. I'd swig from it, then add water. She finally caught me, and the vodka disappeared from the freezer. I knew where she put it, on a high shelf over the stove, but I left it alone after that. By then, it was probably mostly water anyway. I saved my allowance and chore money and got some old wino to buy me nips. He'd get 4 and keep 1. I enabled his drinking. That's what my sponsor would say. And some of this is also reminding me of what Stephen King writes about in his memoir, On Writing. I don't think his first drink is in middle school. I think he recounts that his first drunkenness experience happens on a high school field trip. And this makes me wonder if this story is really about Stephen King kind of going through the 5th step to us, the constant reader. But let's see. Jack shook his head. I don't know what happened to that guy. Ralph, his name was, only I thought of him as Wretched Ralph. Kids can be cruel. For all I know, he's dead, and I helped kill him. Don't get carried away, Jameson said. I'm sure you have stuff to feel guilty about without having to invent a bunch of might-have-beens. Jack looked up and grinned. When he did, Jameson saw that the man had tears in his eyes, not falling, but brimming. Now you sound like Randy. Is that a good thing? I think so. I think I'm lucky I found you. Okay, at this point, I don't want anything bad to happen. I like the sentiments here. Jameson discovered he actually felt lucky to have been found. What else have you got on that list? Because time's passing. I went to Brown and graduated cum laude, but mostly I lied and cheated my way through. I was good at it. And here's a big one. The student advisor I had my senior year was a coke addict. I won't go into how I found that out. Like you said, time's passing, but I did, and I made a deal with him. Good recommendations in exchange for a key of coke. As in a kilo? Jameson asked. His eyes went up most of the way to his hairline. That's right. He paid for it, and I brought it in through the Canadian border, tucked into the spare tire of my old Ford, trying to look like any other college kid who'd spent his semester break having fun and getting laid in Toronto. But my heart was beating like crazy, and I bet my blood pressure was redlining. The car in front of me at the checkpoint got tossed completely, but I got waved right through after showing my driver's license. Of course, things were much looser back then. He paused, then said, I overcharged him for the key too, pocketed the difference. But you didn't use any of the cocaine yourself? No, that was never my scene. I did a line or two once in a while, but what I really wanted, still want, is grain alcohol. When I got a job, I lied to my bosses, but eventually that gave out. It wasn't like college, and there was nobody to mule coke for. Not that I found, anyway. All right, the sentimental Forrest Gump vibes are fading here. Of course, he is confessing his sordid past, but he has also said multiple times that he is a liar. So now I don't know if we can believe some of the things that he's saying. Also, it's time to check back in with our Stephen King bingo card. It looks like at the bottom of row I, we have alcohol or drug addiction. So we get to check that one. Back to the story, Jameson is asking, what did you do exactly? Massaged my cell sheets, made up appointments that didn't exist to explain days when I was too hungover to come in, jiggered expense sheets. That first job was a good one. The sky was the limit, and I blew it. After they let me go, I decided what I really needed was a change of location. In AA, that's called a geographic cure. Never works, but I didn't know that. Seems simple enough now. If you put an asshole on a plane in Boston, an asshole gets off in LA or Denver or Des Moines. I fucked up a second job, not as good as the first one, but good. That was in San Diego. And what I decided then was that I needed to get married and settle down. That would solve the problem. So I got married to a nice girl who deserved better than me. It lasted 2 years, me lying right down the line about my drinking, inventing non-existent business appointments to explain why I was home late, faking flu symptoms to explain why I was going in late or not at all. I could have bought stock in one of those breath mint companies, Altoids, Breath Savers, but was she fooled? I'm guessing not, Jameson said. Listen, are we approaching the end here? Yes, 5 more minutes, promise. Okay. There were arguments that kept getting worse. Stuff got thrown occasionally, and not just by her. There came a night when I came home around midnight, stinking drunk, and she started in on me. You know, all the usual jabber, and all of it was true. I felt like she was throwing poison darts at me and never missing. Jack was looking at his hands again. His mouth was turned down at the corners so severely that for a moment he looked to Jameson like Emmett Kelly, that famous sad-faced clown. You know what came into my mind while she was yelling at me? Glenn Ferguson, that boy I beat up in the 4th grade. How good it felt. Like squeezing the pus out of a boil. I thought it would be good to beat her up, and for sure no one would send me home with a note for my mother because my mom died the year after I graduated from Brown. Whoa, Jameson said. His good feeling about this uninvited confession took a hike. Unease replaced it. He wasn't sure he wanted to hear what came next. I left, Jack said, but I was scared enough to know I had to do something about my drinking. That was the first time I tried AA, out there in San Diego. I was sober when I came back to New York, but that didn't last. Tried again, and that didn't last either. Neither did the third. But now I've got Randy, and this time I might make it, partly thanks to you. He held out his hand. Well, you're welcome, Jameson said, and took it. There is one more thing. Oh no, now I'm like creeped out. This is the part I'm always excited about with Stephen King stories. Like, what's gonna happen? What's this one more thing? There is one more thing, Jack said. His grip was very strong. He was looking into Jameson's eyes and smiling. I did leave, but I cut that bitch's throat before I did. I didn't stop drinking, but it made me feel better. The way beating up Glenn Ferguson made me feel better. And that wino I told you about? Kicking him around made me feel better too. Don't know if I killed him, but I sure did bust him up. Whew, well, I should have known. I mean, this is going to be in a collection called You Like It Darker. Ah, Jack, you're a dick. Back to the story. Jameson tried to pull back, but the grip was too strong. The other hand was once more inside the pocket of the Yankees hoodie. I knew those damn Yankees! I really want to stop drinking, and I can't do a complete 5th step without admitting that I seem to really enjoy. What felt like a streak of hot white light slid between Jameson's ribs, and when Jack pulled the dripping ice pick away, once more tucking it into the pocket of his hoodie, Jameson realized he couldn't breathe. Killing people. It's a character defect, I know, and probably the chief of my wrongs. He got to his feet. Thank you, sir. I don't know what your name is, but you've helped me so much. He started away towards Central Park West, then turned back to Jameson, who was grasping blindly for his Times, as if, perhaps, a quick scan of the arts and leisure section would make everything okay. You'll be in my prayers tonight, Jack said. The end. Oh, and that is the end. Oh, Oh wow. Jack is just evil. So what's interesting about this whole story is that there's, I spent most of the story thinking, oh, this is actually pretty heartfelt. Stephen King is maybe processing, some of the lessons that he has learned from his recovery. So, we get a little sprinkling of, if not biographical details, a little, very, very personal themes are being offered here. And then sucker punch or stabby stab at the end. And it ultimately becomes an age-old moral. Don't talk to strangers. Poor Jameson. Poor humanity. I would have been Jameson. That would have been me on the bench. I would have been interested in hearing this guy's story and interested in, in taking 5 minutes out of my day to see if I can, help somebody. Well, before we wrap things up here, let's look back at our Stephen Kingo bingo card. It looks like we get to mark the spot over here in the O section, 4 down. A character does evil things because he or she is just naturally evil like that. I don't think there's anything else. Let's see. There was no ESP powers, no mentally challenged savant. I didn't see a reference to the number 19. We did get the evil character, though. We did get alcohol and drug addiction. I didn't notice any characters with the initials RF. There was not a kid character who died, and a major character was not a writer. So, we did not get a Kingo, everybody, but hopefully we did have a good time listening to the story and reacting to it for the first time. Well, this has been a reading and reaction to The Fifth Step by Stephen King. I would love to know what were your reactions to this story, and whether or not you would like me to do more of these reaction videos when Stephen King's new collection of short stories is released in May. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening to the Stephen King Book Club.